Hey, yo, it's me, Pops Van Marmalade, and you're watching the Comics-Related Madness Network. Huh? So come get some. CromCon. CromCon.
Your favorite podcast, it's Critical Blast.
Hi, this is Tim TK, host of That Silverline show on Tuesday. Join us at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific every Tuesday night as we discuss pop culture and the joys of making comics.
And I'm Scott Wakefield, host of Silverline's Wednesday Wham, where we talk about comic books and all kinds of great storytelling, sometimes with incredible guests. And we want you to join us Wednesday nights from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you there.
I'm Roland Mann, and I host Silverline's Silver Sunday. Join me every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern as we make mine Silverline.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Silver Sunday on this February the 21st. I am your host, Roland Mann. I am kind of the chief wrangler of this herd of cats that we do every Sunday. And, of course, we have our Wednesday Wham group. We have a special night tonight, but before we get there, we got to do all of our shout-outs. Thanks so much to Daytona Beach Comic Con for being one of our sponsors. It's a fantastic show. If you're in Florida on September I think it's 17th and 18th, 19th, that weekend now, you need to make plans to go because it is a fantastic comic show. I will tell you this, if you're a comic book fan, that's where you need to be. I went to the big show here 1 year, and then I went to Daytona, and there were more comic books at the Daytona Beach Comic Con than the big show here that's held in Orlando. So there were lots of media guests there in Orlando, but if you like comic books, the Daytona Beach Comic Con is the place for you to go.
Are you not allowed to say MegaCon?
Well, it's not that we're not allowed, but I try not to throw too much shade.
Hey, there's a movie coming out on HBO Max, King Kong versus Godzilla and MegaCon.
That's right. So you've already met Alex. We're going to run around here like we usually do, and everybody's going to introduce themselves. And then we're going to end up with Alex, and then we're just going to start peppering him with questions. And if you've got questions, I've got the chat open, so be sure that you drop them on there. Someone's already said love the shirt. I got this from Royal Airships. Sent me a U.S. Coast Guard shirt, so I'm wearing that today. So thank you, Royal. And my father-in-law says, "Hey, my son-in-law, what's up? Screw loose." Glad for you to join us. Pete, you want to share it? You gonna put
okay.
your art up?
Yes, hang on. Then.
Yeah.
Let me hook up to this.
Brett, as soon as he shares, you want to pop him up on the screen?
Oh yeah, I know how this works now.
Okay. And behind the scenes, who you won't see, but occasionally, if it looks like I'm talking to myself, is my son Brett. He is our producer. He turns all the knobs and pushes the buttons that we need to go. And we finally get around to our special guest today. Alex, this feels funny that I'm going to ask you to do this. Someone like me, I'm like, yeah, this guy doesn't need an introduction, but this is going out to the interweb. So for the sake of all those who are, 18 to 25, tell everybody who you are.
Yeah, those 18 to 25-year-olds, they're going, who the hell is that guy? Well, I'm, as the introduction said, I'm Alex Saviuk. I've been in this comic book business for 44 years now. And I don't know where those years went, but at any rate, it was, I started at DC Comics way back in 1977. I hung out there for about 8 or 9 years, drawing Green Lantern and the Flash and Hawkman and the Atom, Aquaman, Superman in DC Presents with whatever guest star they had going all the time. Then we also did a Superman book for a German publisher named Egmont. They wanted DC to produce their own comics specifically for their market. So I was doing a bunch of those.
Now, did they call it Ubermensch?
Excuse me?
Did they call it Ubermensch?
No, they didn't. I don't believe they did. The word Uber wasn't in there. No, that was only on SNL. But yeah, I did. Those were usually 46-page comics. So, and they were quarterly.
Wow.
So if nobody knew what I was doing while I was working for the German/American market. And when I got to Marvel in 1986, when I left DC Comics because they didn't have any more work for me. As a matter of fact, I think in 1985, it was November that I was invited along with everybody else that was working on Superman, whether it be writers or artists. We got invited to this lunch with the, Joe Orlando and Dick Giordano and Janet Kahn and all the bigwigs. And so we just thought, wow, they're giving us a lunch because we're doing such great work. Little did we know that was the death knell.
Oh my goodness!
But Superman sales were so bad that it was bordering on cancellation.
Wow!
And if it wasn't for the fact that it was owned by Warner Brothers and they had all the licensing going on with God knows everything. I mean, T-shirts, paper bags, underwear, bedspreads, pillowcases. They had all that stuff going, and that's what kept Superman and Wonder Woman going, because those titles were, they were dipping below like around 80,000 books a month, which is nothing. And Marvel was, their break-even point was 100,000, and if you were bordering on 100, they might even cancel you.
Aaron still wears his Wonder Woman underoos.
Yeah,
That's
so what
right.
happened was I didn't get
The lacy.
when I didn't get I've turned in my last Superman story in February of 1986, and they said, oh, geez, Julie Schwartz says, I have one story left and I owe it to Kurt Swan to give him the last Superman story before it goes to the new the new editors and stuff. And so I said, okay. Now I happen to be fortunate enough to know John Romita Sr. from when I was in high school, and he lived in the next town from mine. And I went to high school with his eldest son, and also John Romita Jr., who was 4 years younger than I am to the day. We both share the same birthday, but he looks like he's 40 and I look like I'm 70. Okay, so he works out every day. I don't want to say this in public, so don't anybody let it get past this, but I think he dyes his hair. Okay, but at any rate, it doesn't matter. He looks like he's 40 years old. But yeah, so I just called him up and I said, hey, listen, can I come by and maybe drop off some samples? And he goes, what happened to DC? I said, well, and I explained the story to him. He says, yeah, come on by and drop some stuff off in my office, because we have guys here that are constantly late and we're always needing fill-in guys. You could make a living just doing fill-ins here for us. So I said, okay. So I took a walk over across town, met with John, dropped my latest Superman story. I dropped off in his office, and that was I think it was around, President's Day, okay, of 1986. And by Thursday, I got a call from Mike Higgins at Marvel, and they needed to fill in on an Iron Man book. So I did an Iron Man book, 211. And then after that, he was keeping me busy with covers and some of the New Universe stuff that Jim Shooter had created. The fact that he wanted to create a universe of superheroes that were more realistically oriented, just the way they seem to be now, where you're trying to reduce the powers of this guy because it's just too much. Superman can't lift planets anymore and stuff. And so you had a bunch of guys who had powers, and maybe they had some kind of an outfit, but it wasn't really some kind of a spandex, where you could see the six-pack abs and all this kind of stuff. I mean, this character he created, that was, I think, one of his springboard character was Starbrand, which John Romita Jr. was drawing. But lo and behold, by the third issue, I don't know what JR was doing, but they asked me if I'd want to work on a Starbrand fill-in. And I said, sure, what happened to JR? And they said, well, he's working on some other project, but it's going to mean you have to work with Jim Shooter. I said, okay, and so what's wrong with that? Well, Jim can, be kind of tough on artists, et cetera, et cetera. I said, hey, I'm cool. Whatever he wants, you know, if you pay my check, it's a business. Okay.
Right.
We're not talking Michelangelo here. We're not in Greenwich Village. We're going to come up with some like interesting canvases with finger paints and stuff, and we're going to be starving in the corner. Okay. This is a commercial. It's a commercial illustrative business.
A lot of people forget that.
No, they don't.
Oh, many people they've never even realized it. They think that, oh, comics are so creative and we have to do this and that. We have, you can be creative.
I must
creating
do art.
Oh yeah. I mean, there are some writers in the industry, as you may know, and there's a famous one out there who, if an editor should, you know, basically edit one punctuation mark or change a word, he doesn't want his name on it anymore because it's not his work. Okay.
I've had many pencilers that I've been forced to catch up the deadline for as the inker because the art just wasn't going. I'm like, this is a business. I put a roof over my head and feed my kids with this. Get it going.
Well, yeah, and of course, you know, there are those. I mean, I don't know. I know you got some pencilers here in this group, and I don't know how you guys feel as pencilers. If you have an inker working on your stuff, if I always liked to see what the inker can bring to the table.
Yeah.
So even though my pencils were tight, okay, they weren't tight to the point where nowadays people go, oh wow, those pencils are so tight. Let's pop them in Photoshop and we'll just adjust, you know, the contrasts and stuff. We'll print right off of those babies. We don't even need an inker. My stuff was never that tight, okay? But everything was there. But then again, if you look at the artists in my generation, you know, they pencil. You look at a Carmen Infantino. Carmen Infantino's tight pencils look like breakdowns.
I've inked him.
You've inked Carmine. That's not an easy. That's not an easy thing to ink Carmine Infantino.
He made me cry.
But then you get. I remember when he came back to do the Flash, and for a while there, I think Bob Smith was inking him, and he was inking him literally. And so there were a lot of these, like, you know, I mean, the figures look great, but some of the backgrounds were very sketchily done. And he basically worked with the framework that he had as an inker to a penciler. But then there was, you know, a guy like Dennis Jensen, who, if you recall that fellow as an inker,
I inked him too.
He was more like Murphy Anderson. He came in there, and I think if he inked a half a page a day, it was a lot. Because
I was Dennis's favorite inker.
Oh, really?
Dennis Jensen, yeah.
Oh, do you have any idea where he is these days?
Well, last I heard, he was just up north. He was in Wisconsin too. He was up in Lodi, last I heard, but not Lodi, just up Mauston. But I haven't heard from him in years. He used to call me quite a bit, and I used to ink him quite a bit. But
isn't that who inked Barry Windsor Smith on a lot of the stuff at Malibu, the Rune stuff? Curtis, do you remember that? Was it Dennis Jensen?
I know it was a bunch of people. I mean, I know Larry Welch did some of the inking for it. I can't remember who else. Who else was
Rune?
doing? Yeah. I remember because he told me that Barry Windsor Smith to give him tips.
yeah. So Alex, who were some of your favorite? So you've been inked by a lot of different folks. So who were some of your favorites?
Oh, well, I mean, may he rest in peace. Joe Sinnott was a hero of mine as I was growing up as a kid. You know, I mean, when Vinnie Coletta stopped working on the Fantastic Four, and then Joe came in with issue number 44 with the Inhumans and stuff, and it was, oh my God, this stuff is beautiful again.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, Jack Kirby's had his share of inkers. You know.
Yes.
When I first came up with Jack Kirby, he was inked by Dick Ayers. And that's what I knew. And then when Dick left for whatever reasons, and Stan put George Bell / Russos on Jack's pencils, it was a whole different ball of wax for me. I just didn't like it.
Yeah.
And it seemed like George had to kind of like work on issue after issue to try and get the feel of Jack's pencils, and then be just as he might have been getting a better feel. Then Chick Stone came in. And his line was very lyrical, and you know, it just cleaned up a lot of it. But one of my favorite inkers, I would have to say for me, was Frank Giacoia.
Oh,
I loved his work on just about everybody, and when he inked me, the couple of times that we worked together. As a matter of fact, the first big comic book I drew was Green Lantern number 100, Green Lantern, Green Arrow. and there were 2 stories in there. I did the front feature with Green Lantern. And even though Vinnie Coletta was credited as the inker, because he was the inker of that book, Vinnie was just so bogged down with so many assignments that Frank Giacoia inked everything in that story except for the faces.
Really?
Because when you looked at a Vinnie face, you knew Vinnie inked it.
Yeah.
Okay. So the non-astute eye would look at it and go, gee, these bodies look great, but I don't know what happened to the head. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And not that the faces look bad. It's just that I'm thinking, wow, if Frank is going to
They look like Vinny.
If Frank was going to ink the story for the 98% of it, too bad he couldn't do the other 2%. That would have been great. But I really like Joe Sinnott, Frank Giacoia, the aforementioned Dennis Jensen. Joe Rubenstein was great on my work. There was somebody that maybe not all too well known named Don Hudson, who I really enjoyed also. Oh gosh, I had one issue of DC Presents that was inked by Tony DiZuniga, which didn't look like my work at all, but it was just a lot of fun to see it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it was Superman and the Metal Men. And although Tony was a great inker, somehow the metal didn't shine all that much when he inked it. He just had a sort of a little bit of a dry brush technique here and there, and the Metal Men didn't look that like they glistened too much. But let's see, who else? Oh gosh, a number of well, let's see. Al Williamson actually inked me in a couple of covers, which was nice. I had Eric Larson inked me once on a cover of Web of Spider-Man. Al Milgrom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
just
Sam
recently-
De La Rosa was a really good inker on me too. I enjoyed his work. There's probably a bunch of guys that I'm leaving off right now. But you know, I've worked with a lot of really good guys.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know, they bring, as I said, if they bring their own personality to the work and make it better. Okay.
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying that I'm the best penciler in the world by far. Okay. But when you kind of put your work into your efforts into it, and then when an inker comes in and changes things for what you think doesn't look as good as it could have looked or should have looked, then it's a little bit disappointing.
Yeah, you still want it to look like Alex Saviuk. You still want it to look like your pencils with an inker's personality over it.
Right, right. Yeah. So
yeah, crew, you guys, I will dominate the all these questions here if you guys don't jump in with some questions.
Yeah.
I have the fortunate privilege that Alex and I don't live too far from each other, so I get to see him. When we're not in the middle of the plague, I get to see him. So you guys jump in here and ask him some questions.
I got a couple. So you were Alex, you were talking earlier about, you know, working with Jim Shooter and how, you know, you were kind of forewarned that it might be a little bit of a challenge. Did you feel it was more demanding under his kind of guardianship, or was that something that you just kind of hit the ground running? Could you describe or kind of give some detail?
Yeah, actually, I had been up at Marvel when I was working at DC about 1980. Okay, I lived in New York, and I would get the New York Times on Sunday all the time just to check. They used to have a lot of art, commercial art jobs in the art section, advertising art, occasionally for storyboards and things like that, which I also did besides comics. And so there happened to be an ad that said, you know, comic book company looking for illustrators to work on special projects with characters and stuff, and just a post office box number, send samples. And I figured, comic book, you know, whenever we did special project comics, they always paid twice the rate or 3 times the rate. So you always wanted to get in on those things because they were short term.
Yeah.
And so I sent in some comics, letter, the whole bit. And about a week later, I get a call from John Romita Sr. at Marvel. And he goes, Alex, what's the matter? They're not giving you work? I said, oh, yeah, they're giving me work. But I mean, I'm answering an ad in the New York Times. It didn't say Marvel Comics. He goes, well, would you have time to do anything for us? I said, well, what do you have? And he explained to me that they had a 32-page special project book that paid triple rate. And I said, say no more.
Right. Triple rate. That's all you got to say.
Yeah. And he said, I'm so glad that you're interested because I know that you know Spider-Man and, you know, but I've had plenty of illustrators answer the call here and they're really good artists, but they'd come to me and they'd say, so who's Peter Parker?
Oh my
And,
God.
and what does Spider-Man do? And let me have some comics so I can get his motivations. And he's thinking, they're never going to be able to draw this, And so, yeah, I got
motivations.
So I got the gig. But at any rate, I did meet Jim Shooter at that time in his office. And, he was talking about storytelling, and he had his spinner rack right there, and he pulled out Avengers #3. And he liked to talk about how Jack Kirby would do 6-panel grids because he didn't think that anybody needed all these highfalutin layouts and all this other stuff. I mean, it was supposed to be a 6-panel grid, and the top third was room for dialogue, which meant you now had a 16:9 ratio bottom 2/3, okay, as if you were watching television or a movie. And he pointed out to this one particular panel in the story where the Hulk was throwing the caboose of a moving train at Iron Man. And meanwhile, Thor was coming in from the other side, and Giant Man was coming in from one side. And this was all in like a 1/6 panel. And he was saying, see, now this is storytelling. You don't need these big giant panels. You like to see all the action going on in the panel, all these close-ups and stuff that some people like. He says, that's not storytelling. So I kind of knew where he was coming from.
Right.
And so when I got up to Marvel the second time, and they said to me, Mike Higgins, the editor, said, he goes, hey, it's going to be a fill-in with Jim Shooter. I said, that's cool. I'll take it. He goes, well, sometimes, again, he could be hard to work with. I said, I'm cool. Don't worry. I can adapt to anybody. So we had a discussion, and he said, well, here's my plot. And he says, it's for 22 pages, but he says, I want you to go home and do thumbnails. And if it's 27 or 28 pages with your thumbnails, he said, don't worry about it. Bring it in. We'll go through it together, and, we'll weed it out, and we'll edit it the whole bit and all that stuff. I said, okay, fine. So now Jim's plot read like a short story. I mean, that's all it was. I mean, it didn't start with, it started with page 1. I think that the thing itself was about 11 or 12 pages of typewritten stuff. And it was just paragraphs. And so I'm riding home on the train from Marvel, and I got my pen out, and as I'm reading it, I'm just making a notation, page 1, page 2, page 3. At the end of the story, I got to page 22. And I said, well, how about that? Okay. So I went home, and I just sat down, and I basically did it the so-called Neil Adams way. I took a 6:9, and I, did it on 8.5:11, and Neil would then just blow it up on a projector and project it down. Okay. So I figured I'm going to do this whole story nice and tight in, on an 8.5:11 sheet, 6:9 or 7:10, and do it real tight as I can in that little format, bring it in. And when I did, he looked at it and he goes, this is amazing. As a matter of fact, he says, I see now that I can get, to expand this one section here where he goes to the moon, and we could use a really big panel here. Hold on a second. And he gets on the phone, and he says, he's like, advertising? Yeah, this is Shooter. Yeah, I need 2 more pages.
Wow.
So basically, it ended up being a 24-page story. And, I said to him, hey, listen, when I expand this section, do you want me to, come back? He goes, no, I'll trust you. I'm sure you'll work it out fine. So anyway, I did the pencils. I went in. Unfortunately, he wasn't at the office, or he was in a meeting at the time that I got there. And so the editor said, yeah, well, he approved the layout. So, this looks really good. And then I was taking the train home, and I came back, and my wife says, oh, Jim Shooter's office called. I said, I was just there an hour ago. What's going on? She says, I don't know. You better call him. So I called, and Jim was on the phone, and he said, hey, listen, I really like what you did. And just to keep you here at Marvel, he says, I want to give you a $15 a page raise, right? To show, in good faith that we really like your work, and we want you to continue with us. So I had no trouble with Jim Shooter whatsoever,
That's great.
But that was the only time that was the only time I got to work with him. Okay. And that was also the only time that in his office, I got to meet Steve Ditko for the one time.
Wow.
So I walked in, and they said, oh yeah, as a matter of fact, it was for that fill-in when I was with Mike Higgins. He goes, yeah, just wait in Jim's office. He'll be there in about 10 minutes, and just hang out there till he gets in. And I walk in, and there was this gentleman who I kind of thought was Steve Ditko because I had seen a picture of him before, As a matter of fact, in Amazing Spider-Man Annual #1, there was this cool little story at the back end, how Stan and Steve create Spider-Man. And Ditko drew a self-portrait of himself in there, drawing Spider-Man, and I'm going, that looks like Steve Ditko. So at any rate, and sure enough, it was. And I was basically the fanboy, and I said, I introduced myself to him, and he kind of mumbled a little bit of something under his breath, and that was that. That was me meeting Steve Ditko.
Wow.
Wow.
That's very cool. We got a question from YouTube from Thwip. He says, what was the process of working on the Amazing Spider-Man newspaper strip?
Oh, okay. The process was, now, although Stan Lee was, the first one to introduce the plot style, more or less, of comics, where you don't work off a full script, the newspaper was done in a full script situation. And I believe that at the beginning, Stan was writing it, but when I got there in 1997, I think he was maybe writing it for another year or two, and then he had ghostwriters working for him. I know Jim Salicrup worked for him for a couple of years, and then Roy Thomas actually started by around 1980. And so Roy was doing the scripts, and then Stan would do his editorial magic on it to make sure it sounds exactly like Stan. And so people really would not know the difference. But unfortunately, Roy never got a credit on the strip for all the years that he worked on it.
Wow.
But what I would, every 2 weeks, I would get a whole week or 2 weeks worth of dailies and Sundays. And the Sundays would be 6 panels. The dailies would be 3 panels a day.
Mm-hmm.
And Monday through Saturday. And so you'd kind of have to read what was going on in between, because the Sundays in a way were not continuous, where sometimes I would draw a Sunday and at the bottom of the first, of the 6th panel, it would say, next week, the aftermath. And I'm going, the aftermath? And so if I wouldn't read what was going on in between, I get to the first panel of the next Sunday, and in that panel, the cops are leading the villain away to the police cars. And I'm going, holy mackerel, I missed the whole fight. So then I got to read it, and I go, wow, Larry Lieber, Stan's brother, who was penciling at the when we first started, and had been penciling already, I think, maybe I started in 77. I think he started penciling that book in the dailies as of 1970 or 68 or something.
Wow.
And so he was on it for a really long time. And so I said, wow, Larry gets to draw all the cool stuff, and I get to do the aftermath. What a bummer. At least, though, that was 1997. But then I would say, does that answer your question, Whip, as far as how that goes? 6 panel pages. I would pencil it out. I'd have to put in Greek the word balloons at the top, just like you would normally. Whoever was speaking first would be on the left side of the panel. Okay. And all that stuff was done in pencil as space for the letterer. And then I would end up sending it to, I'd send it back to California. And then they would send it to, Stan would look over the artwork, then he'd send it to the letterer. Letterer would do his thing, and then they'd send it to Joe Sinnott to ink. So that's pretty much how it worked. Every 2 weeks when I was doing the Sundays, I'd spend, about, I guess, a day and a half or 2 days penciling out the 2 Sundays, send them off via FedEx. And that's how that started. And
everything was phone, fax, and FedEx back then.
Yes, that's it. That's it. As a matter of fact, when, let's see, my contract was over with Marvel in 1996, late 96, and then in early 97. In early 97, I got a phone call from Ralph Macchio, the editor, one of the editors up at Marvel, and he goes, hey, how would you like to work on the Spider-Man Sunday strip with Stan Lee? And I said, yeah, sure. I wasn't really working too much in comics anymore. And so I figured, hey, just to keep my hand at it, might as well. So I sent Stan a couple of my Web of Spider-Man books with a, introductory letter, etc. And then those were the days where we used to have answering machines, with the tape, the little cassettes, right?
Yep.
So my wife and I go shopping. Hi, Dan.
Hey, thank you for the pizza. I'm gonna ask you for the pizza now.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Would you get a deal on buy one, get one half off or something?
Nah, I went to get the first pizza, and the guy says, I'm really sorry, I forgot. And I burnt the one side of it, and I wouldn't sell it that way. So you want me to make you another one? I said, yeah, go ahead. He goes, okay, fine. Then you can take that one home with you. So that was the way it worked.
We'll be having pizza all week.
We'll be having a lot of pizza. Yeah.
I had pizza tonight too.
Gee, I'm sorry. I got.
Who's that guy?
Sorry.
Dan, who's that guy? That's Roland. I'm on a video call.
Oh, I didn't know. Sorry.
Okay. I don't know where I lost my train of thought. Where was I? Back in around 2003 in February, I remember I get a call from Mike Kelly, who was, okay, come here. Mike Kelly, hold on a second. Come here. Okay, my little dog, Snoopy, always likes to get in on the conversation.
Oh.
Okay. Hey, bud, what's going on?
What's up,
Okay,
Snoopy?
so, Mike Kelly, Stan's office assistant, calls up and says, hey, listen, we're kind of like in a frenzy here because John Tartaglione, who used to be the regular inker on the newspaper strip, the dailies, got sick and he's in the hospital. Would you be able to ink a week? And I said, oh, yeah, sure. So, I had been inking my covers and stuff like that. So inking was not unfamiliar to me, but I was always inking myself and now I was going to ink somebody else. And, it's kind of tough when, and again, I'm not the greatest artist in the world and I'm not the biggest critic, but if you see a drawing that just doesn't look like it's going to fit your rhythms, I couldn't just go ahead and ink it the way it was penciled. So I would kind of, I guess, embellish, if that's the word. Okay. And, when I ended up finishing that and sending it in, they really liked it. And they said, oh, this is great. Hey, if we ever need you to do another week of inks, would you be interested? I said, yeah, sure, no problem. It was fun. And that was February of 2003 or March. And then I think it was in early November, they called me up and they said, hey, listen, John Tartaglione had passed away from cancer. That's why he was in the hospital in early February, having some procedure done on his throat. And he ended up passing away. So they asked me if I would like to do the gig. And I said, of course, hey, ink a week and pencil a Sunday. That was a good mainstay and still try to pick up other things. And so I was doing that from 2003 all the way on, where I would ink Larry's pencils. As time went on, I stayed truer to them and just maybe, if you want to call it, fix a little of this or fix a little bit of that. And, but pretty much I found inking to be very relaxing, I could, if I'm doing layouts or pencil the design part, I have to have quiet or maybe just some easy listening music in the background. But if I'm inking, I can watch a ball game. I can listen to television. You can talk to me.
You can multitask.
Excuse me?
You can multitask.
I can multitask. Although sometimes I do have to say this. After working on those dailies for so long, there would be times where I'd fall asleep at the table and I'd wake up just as my wife would come in. She'd go, Alex, are you okay? And I'd put my head up and I'd run a line right across the daily. And I go, oh, geez, yeah, I'm okay. What'd you yell at me for? She goes, I thought maybe you passed out or something. I said, I don't know. I'm tired. I fell asleep. So then I'd have to go in there. And in Photoshop, you can clean it up real easy. But then, of course, you got to go in there with whiteout anyway.
Right.
In the process of inking the newspaper strip, where there was a company in Orlando called Reed Brennan Media Associates. They're still there. And they're responsible for taking all the comic book strips or the comic strips for King Features. And they put them all together there. Okay. If they also, the dailies would get colored over there also. So sometimes there was a disparity between the coloring of the dailies versus the coloring of the Sundays. The Sundays were actually being colored in a conventional or traditional way, where if you recall 30 years ago, you'd get a reduced Xerox of a particular page. The colorist would go home with his Dr. Martin's dyes or his markers, and he'd mark the damn thing up, and there'd be YB2s and BR1s and all this stuff in the margin, right? Well, that's how those Sundays were still being colored. That's why oh, there you go.
I've still got my Jameson color chart.
Yeah, that's why in that first issue of Green Lantern that I drew, Green Lantern was using his beam, which is supposed to be green you know, maybe on page 5 or 6, and it turned out to be yellow.
Ooh.
And I said to Julie Schwartz, I said, Julie, how can this bean be yellow? And he said, the printer must have messed up, or the colorist forgot to label it. And the printers don't think. They only take what's there, and they go, okay, if that's yellow, well, then it's going to be a yellow, you know? He's not there to call up and make corrections. Everything is booked on time. So that's pretty much how that goes. Did I answer your question, Whip, or do you have any other questions to add?
He's not said anything since then. I
probably put him to sleep, and he's not there anymore. Okay.
No. I would assume that you covered that.
Okay.
If I could squeeze in another question, you know,
Sure.
Alex, you know, I think what's interesting is, you know, as you know, it's for some people it's really hard to break into the industry, but what people don't talk about is how hard it is to stay in the industry. And you have such an illustrious career, and to be able to navigate and stay in the industry as long as you have on the same character, especially, I mean, could you kind of remark on that, because that's not normal. That's very unique to your experience and your pedigree.
Well, put it this way. As I had mentioned before, I stayed with DC from 1977 to 1986, and then things didn't work out with the Superman books. So I ended up having to go to Marvel. And then Marvel, within a year or two, I went under contract with them. And so, you know, every month there was a certain amount of work that I had to invoice for. And because the royalty schedule at Marvel was so good, that you would always get basically a third check at the end of the month, which was your royalty for the book. Web of Spider-Man, for all the years that I worked on it, did, you know, I would say for me exceptionally well, because, you know, if I was making X 1 week and another X the second week, the third check would be bigger than the regular X's for the royalties. So you did really well. And then, you know, at the time in 1990, well, let's see, when they were doing the hologram covers and all that stuff, and stuff was really kicking in. I mean, the early 90s were, you know, pots of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Lots of money in the 90s.
I mean, I was, you know, when they told me that on Web of Spider-Man number 90, which was the 30th anniversary of Spider-Man, it was a double-sized issue. And I remember the editor calling me up and saying, okay, it sold 790,000 copies in the direct market. And I said, what? And I said, and what about, and then he says, and then there'll be newsstand returns and all that other kind of stuff later. I said, oh, wow. So I can recall, without mentioning numbers, because I don't like to do that. But, you know, I used to have direct deposit, and I'd call up my bank every 2 weeks, and I'd say, did my check come down? Yes. And they tell me what the amount was, and it was an expected amount. I'd say, okay, fine. And even the royalties were in a particular range. Okay. And then for the royalty on that big monster book, I said, oh yeah, could you tell me what the, you know, what that check is? And there was this pregnant pause. And I said, hello, you still there? And they gave me the number, and I said, very nonchalantly, oh, okay, thanks. And I got off the phone, and I said, yes, you know, just one of those.
Yeah.
And I told when my wife came home, I said, you cannot, I said, I got to tell you something. And of course, when I told her, she goes, you're lying. I said, no, I'm not lying. I said, this is just the kind of the luck of the draw here. But at any rate, this was the early 90s, and I only was with Marvel until 1996. And then what happened was, in 1993, they took me off of Web of Spider-Man because they said, well, the sales are starting to go down. We've given you a new writer, we've given you a new inker, and the sales aren't going up. So now the administrative big guys upstairs said, well, we got to make another change. So the only logical thing left is to change the penciler. If you want to yell, go right ahead. And I said, well, if I yell, will I get my book back? And they said, no. I said, well, then I'm not going to belittle myself and waste your time either. So, you know, it is what it is. They said, but we have another book for you to do. I said, you do? Yeah, it's a Spider-Man book. I said, well, wait a second. You're taking me off a Spider-Man book that I've been working on for 7.5 years, and you're giving me another Spider-Man book. Wow, you guys are very trustworthy, aren't you? And they said, oh, this is based on the animated series, and it's not part of the conventional, you know, Marvel universe and yada, yada. And I figured, well, it, it's based on this, and they wanted, but they said you can draw it in your regular style. As a matter of fact, you can even pencil and ink it if you like. And I said, really? So I figured, well, that sounds like a pip. Yeah, let me try that. Now, I'm not John Byrne where I can whip out 3 penciled and inked books a month. I don't know how the hell he did that, but I had trouble penciling and inking 1 book a month. Okay.
Mhm.
And, with all the time and details and, you're working on your baby, you're putting your name on it.
Right.
This is your stuff. Okay. And it was just long hours, just longer than I wanted it to be. But then I thought, wow, I'm working on number 1 and number 2. And, with the royalties coming in, I should be able to buy a new car.
Yeah.
Well, the royalties on the first issue were probably about as good as 1 royalty check for Web of Spider-Man on the regular monthly basis.
Mhm.
And then the second one dwindled down to about 1/3 of that. And there was nothing for the third one on.
Yeah.
But I was still in the contract. I had kids. I had bills, so I figured, hey, you know what? I'm on the contract and I got a job. I can't complain.
Right.
That only lasted for about 2.5 more years, and then those books weren't selling, so they canceled them, and nobody else had work for me at Marvel. So then I ended up. Jim Salicrup had already left the editorship of Spider-Man,
Right.
and he went over to Topps Comics.
Right.
And at Topps, he was doing all kinds of stuff, plus the X-Files. So when I called him up and I said, hey, Jim, I got to get off my contract because I can't work for anybody else if I'm on the contract. So he says, well, if you get out of your contract, he says, you want to come here and draw the X-Files, you can have that book because the people in California at the 1013 X-Files company, they're not that happy with the artist we have now because of the likenesses. And, I know you'll be able to do likenesses because I worked on this book with Jim called Sledgehammer for 2 issues. One from the Sledgehammer television series.
Yeah.
And they gave me the photographs and I basically, drew the likeness from whatever they had there for me. And so I was familiar with that process. And so, when I got to the X-Files, I was there only for 1.5 years, but then the movie came out. And then all of a sudden the company said, well, we're going to be concentrating more on more TV episodes and movies. So we're not going to be able to approve scripts anymore with any regularity. So basically the book folded. Once the book folded, that's when my comic book career, Curtis, was pretty much in jeopardy. And then shortly after that, thankfully, though, I did get to work on, got that call that I had mentioned about doing the Spider-Man Sundays.
Yeah.
One thing about Stan Lee is very loyal to the people he works with. So the fact is that if Stan was still alive today, I'd still be working on the Spider-Man Sundays and the daily strips today. Okay, so that's in that sense, I was keeping my hand in American comics, but also as far as other comics are concerned, I had when I was up at Marvel in '86, one of the things that they gave me to draw was a book called The Defenders of the Earth, which was Flash Gordon, Phantom, Mandrake the Magician, Lothar. That was a lot of fun because I was a big Phantom fan from Cy Barry days back in the early 60s and whatever. And so I got to draw the Phantom for a while, which was cool. But then that book only lasted 4 issues and 4 printed issues. And in the 4th issue, there was a section on Mandrake's origin, which Mike Higgins was writing. And I said, he said, I really don't know too much about Mandrake. Do you know anything more about him? I said, well, I watched the cartoon, so I just saw that episode. I mean, I could plot that out for you. He goes, oh, that'd be great. So I plotted out the origin of Mandrake section in 2 pages there for him. And then by the time we got to the 5th issue, he plotted out the first 6 pages. And then he said, okay, well, listen, here are some key points to hit. You can go ahead and plot out the last 16 pages. And I said, what? I mean, believe me, when you have to do it for somebody else and it's not your baby, it's not the easiest thing in the world to come up with all of a sudden hitting these key moments, putting a whole story together. I got it done. I had notes all over the margin like the old Jack Kirby days and stuff like that. But it was a daunting task, to say the least. And unfortunately, that story never got printed. It got inked by Fred Fredericks, the regular inker. And then lo and behold, I'm going to say about a half a dozen years ago, I get this package, this FedEx package from Marvel that has some weight to it. And I'm going, huh, what could this be? And it was that issue of Defenders of the Earth that never saw print, that was completely inked, by Fred Fredericks. And, they just sent me back all the artwork.
Wow.
And it was okay for me to get that artwork because when I was usually when I was working with an inker on a regular basis, I would always say, hey, listen, pretty much since it's like a 60-40 or a 65-35 split, how about if for every 3 issues we do together, I'll keep 2 and you keep 1. So as it turned out with the Defenders, with Fred, I said, look, I'll take issue 1, you take issue 2, I'll take 3, you take 4. And then basically I felt justified in saying, okay, well, I guess I'm getting number 5, which I did. The covers, for some reason or other, I got all the covers, and I didn't complain. At any rate, so with the Phantom, as I'm going on again, I found out that some American guys like Dick Giordano and Bob McLeod were working for a Swedish company called Egmont again. Oh no, the German company when I was doing Superman was called EHAPA. Egmont was a Swedish, I think, like a subsidy of EHAPA. And so they were publishing comics, and one of them was The Phantom. The Phantom is published there every 2 weeks, and they would have about, I think, well, out of the 26 issues, maybe they'd have 18 or 19 new stories, and then the other stuff would be reprints. And besides reprinting old Phantom strips, they would also reprint a lot of European comics, Italian stuff, whatever came by. So you got to see all this really cool European stuff. And the Europeans, they're really crazy in the way they do pages where, I found out that some of these artists in Europe, they'll draw 2 pages a week. And I'm going, 2 pages a week? How the hell can you make a living doing that? Well,
right.
If you looked at the pages, there would be 9 to 12 panels on each page. And every panel would have backgrounds wherever the heck they were in. If they were in France, there'd be buildings and streets and cars and everything. You had to have backgrounds. You couldn't do American comics where you would have, let's say the first panel would be an establishing shot, so we know where we are. And then throughout the rest of the page, we just throw in a couple of props from wherever we are to remind you that, hey, listen, we're still here, okay?
Yeah. Or if you're manga, just all the little action lines, right?
Yeah, or whatever, I mean, when speaking with some people like to put backgrounds in every panel. I feel that sometimes it's distracting, okay? It's not necessary to have that there if you're, doing some action or whatever. But hey, those that's just my particular opinion. The way I worked, I feel it worked pretty well. Although with the newspaper strip, again, in answering Whip's question, if he's still around, because you only have 6 panels, there would usually be a background in every panel because the reader only had 6 panels to deal with on a weekly basis. So you always wanted to make sure that he kind of knew where he was going to be. Unless I did draw a close-up that kind of filled up the half, 3/4 of the frame, then I felt like, okay, I don't need to draw a piece of a window in the background or a bookcase with 8 books on it. Okay, I didn't feel that was necessary. But so I found out that Dick Giordano, Bob McLeod, and Paul Ryan were working for the Swedes doing the Phantom, and not that I was going to call any of those guys up and say, hey, I hear you're working on the Phantom. How about giving me the contact info so I can hone in there too? That's kind of like moving in on somebody else's girlfriend. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we don't want to do that. So in a roundabout way, I was able to find out there was this organization called the Friends of the Phantom. And I got in touch with this one guy who was the president. He goes, oh yeah, I know the publisher of Egmont. I'll give you his contact information. And then I said, voila. Okay. So I put together some samples, some penciled samples, and I, emailed them over. And the next day the guy called me and emailed me back and he goes, hey, when can you start? I have a script for you. And I said, oh, this is great. This was 2004. But he had such a huge stable of artists that were primarily European and South American that I got to draw 1, maybe 2 books a year. But there were 32 pages. And between doing that and working on the strip and some storyboards and stuff here and there for some advertising work, because I had an agent getting me that kind of work, I still filled up my weeks. So to answer your question, Curtis, yeah, if it wasn't for the fact that I branched out and got into the European market, the fact that I was lucky enough to kind of hook up with Stan Lee and do that Spider-Man stuff, you know, my career would probably not have spanned 44 years. I don't know what I'd be doing now, but maybe I'd be selling cars. I have no idea.
And Thwip says yes, you answered the question. So
okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
Curtis, did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. I mean, I would venture to say, if I can just comment, I'm sure you had to be a really, really reliable artist to keep employed that whole time. I mean, you know, there's circumstance, but that's a big part.
To be honest
right?
with you, that was, I would probably say, since I consider myself to be like a good journeyman type artist, you know, who meets the deadlines. And
Yep,
quite
that was my
honestly,
big
as
thing
I
too.
said before, going to Marvel, you'd have a lot of these prima donna guys that would miss deadlines all the time. And so they would need fill-ins. So then the artsy
formed a
fartsy
company,
guys,
didn't
the fanboy artists, they miss deadlines, but the guys who want to get paid all the time and have them call you back, those were guys like me, and we did our jobs and we went ahead and so like, yes, reliability was, I would say, one of my main factors to keep my career going.
Mine. I never missed the deadline.
Well, there you go, Barb.
Yeah.
I wasn't the greatest thinker in the world, but I was a workhorse. And if they were falling behind or needed some fill-ins, my phone was always ringing.
Yeah, I remember actually when I first got in on to do Web of Spider-Man, it was funny because I was working on that 5th issue of Defenders of the Earth and finishing up those pencils. And I remember getting a call from my new buddy at the time, Howard Mackey. And he said, hey, listen, Jim Salicrup needs somebody to fill in on Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man. You know, would you be interested? I think you'd be good for that book. I said, Howard, I'd love to work on it, but I got to finish this first. I can't just drop this because I have a chance to draw Spider-Man. If you could explain to Jim, hey, listen, I'm going to need another week or 10 days to finish this up. If he can wait that long, great. If he can't, well, then he'll have to get somebody else. So now I did what I could to finish up within 2 weeks, actually, to get that book done. And then after that, I called up Jim and I said, hey, Jim, would you still need me to draw Spider-Man? He goes, oh yeah, you're available? I said, yeah, well, I had to finish that book. He goes, hey, I respect that. Yeah, I still need somebody to do these fill-ins. So I did 3 Amazing Spider-Man Adventures fill-ins, which was kind of fun at the time. And then after I did those, back to back, he says, hey, I have a Web of Spider-Man fill-in 2-parter to do if you're interested. I said, yeah, sure. So I did that. And then he goes, okay, how about, this was Web 35 and 36. He goes, okay, how would you like to do another fill-in? I said, sure. He goes, we have number 39. I said, 39? I said, what happened to 37 and 38? He says, well, our regular guy is working on 37. And then while you're doing 39, we want him to jump on 38 because he's a little slow. I said, okay, fine. So I finished 39 and I came back in and I said, hey, okay. So he says, hey, you want to work on another one? I said, sure. What do you got? He goes, Web 38. I said, Web 38. I said, what happened to the other guy? He says, he's still working on 37. I said, good God. So, I mean, I did 39, but now 38 is going to be late. How much time do I have to get that done? He goes, how much time do you think you need? I said, 2 weeks. He goes, wow, that would be amazing. I said, okay. So and unfortunately, that story in Web 38 had to deal with the Lincoln Tunnel. What's the matter with you? Hey, come on.
How many of you jumped on Google to see who was a penciler? He was talking about.
So at any rate, with the story in Web 38 took place around the Lincoln Tunnel. And well, we didn't have the internet in those days. And all my New York books had very, very little reference on the Lincoln Tunnel. So I actually had to go into New York City with a camera. And I figured, okay, well, I'll just hang out around the entrance and get those shots that I need. Lo and behold, there was a brick wall that was set about 6 feet tall around the entrance that was a drop down into the Lincoln Tunnel. And I had to kind of jump up and hang on this freaking wall and try to get the pictures that I needed. I was just waiting for a cop to come by and pull me over and say, hey, get in the back here. What are you doing? So I lucked out and I was able to get the reference shots that I needed. And I ended up doing the story in 2 weeks. And well, lo and behold, then they said, hey, listen, we have a 4-part story now, Web of Spider-Man story, if you're interested, by Peter David. And I said, oh, yeah, I'd love to work on a Peter David. Plus, I'm thinking job security for 4 months. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm working on this fill-in. And I think by the time we got to the 4th issue, I'm always reading the letter columns. And in the letter column, that they finally got to my first, they got to the, the issues of web that I worked on. So I always like to hear what people have to say. It's always nice if somebody doesn't like rake you through the coals and say, wow, this guy sucks. We need somebody else. Thankfully, that wasn't the case. But I remember this one guy saying, wow, I really like the team that you got going there now. And the answer was, yeah, well, there are regular guys. And I'm going, I'm the regular guy. So I called up Jim Salicrup and I said, hey, Jim, I just read in a letter column that I'm the regular guy on Web of Spider. He goes, well, I figured you would have known that by now. I said, well, I don't take anything for granted. You never said, hey, you know what? You're the regular guy. Let's get you going. He goes, oh, no. I said, he goes, we had to fire the other guy because he just couldn't meet a deadline. So, the book is yours. I said, okay, sounds cool.
Wow.
So that was comparable to Gina Carano finding out that she got fired from the Mandalorian on the internet.
Twitter, yeah.
Reverse.
They didn't tell it to her face. They just said, "Hey, you're off the series."
But I think what you and Barbara are saying about being reliable. I mean,
yeah.
There's the people that have those spikes, right, of creativity, or they spend all this time and they have that one issue. But in my opinion, and it may not be popular, like the best artists are the ones that are reliable. The best ones are the ones that define a run of a series consistently. Right. I mean, I think the people that are consistent could probably potentially easily invest all that reliability into one catastrophically amazing issue, but they wouldn't be the people that can fill in day out, and I think that's kind of the unsung heroes of the industry is people who do that,
Yeah.
So.
And I think too, to piggyback on that, Curtis, I think that's part of what fans like. You do something they like, they want more. If you only give them the one thing, if you only can do 22 pages in a year, then they've got a short memory because there's so much good stuff out there, and there's that regular stuff. When you got the regular guy that, oh, look at this every month, I get to consume this regular guy.
Yeah, I was basically a 1.5 page a day type guy. All right, and that got the work done. And now I remember going to San Diego for the first time in 2003. And I have all the respect in the world for Rags Morales. Okay. Fantastic artist, great guy. And he was sitting next to me in San Diego. And I loved what he was doing on Hawkman at the time. And I'm going, wow, this stuff was so highly detailed, the lighting and every panel, all the stuff. And I said, hey, so Rags, how many pages a week, how many pages, do you do? He goes, well, I do 2 pages. And I'm thinking he was going to say 2 pages a day. He said, he goes, I do 2 to 3 pages a week. I said, what? 2 to 3 pages a week? He goes, oh yeah, the editors want me to give it my best stuff, and they're very patient with that. And so, I'll do, however, 2, 3 issues over a period of time. In the meantime, they've got a couple of other issues planned with a few other pencilers. Okay, so you didn't have runs on books with regular guys that just didn't have that particular. I don't want to say work ethic is the proper terminology, because I didn't ask him how long his days were. I mean, that's the one thing.
Yeah.
You ask an artist, hey, how many pages can you do a day? And if he goes, well, I can do 3 pages a day. You go, really? And I go, well, what time do you start working and what time do you finish? I asked that question to Alfredo Alcala once, if anybody is familiar with his work. Okay. And Alfredo, coming from the Philippines, just like so many of the other Filipino guys, they got paid squat down there. So they had to draw pencil and ink 3 pages a day just to make a living. Okay. So I said, well, when do you, he goes, I start at, 9 o'clock in the morning and I finish at, midnight. So 15 hours.
15-hour day.
I used to ink 2 pages a day, and I put in a 12 to 16-hour day.
So I want to kind of circle back around to this. It's we're at the halfway mark. Roberta, are you coloring?
I am.
Do you want to share? We'll swap.
I could share.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Excellent.
I'm just flatting, so it's kind of boring.
That's okay.
Oh, hey,
Still-
Peter, I like that getup you got there, where you got your camera just like facing down on the board. That's kind of neat.
Yeah, it's a little bit annoying because I want to look at the page and I have to. So I just have to lean to the side and try not to distort what I'm drawing. But
Pete, you shaved too, didn't you?
And
yeah, I
Roberta,
took it.
how
Let me
are
see
you
if I
going
can
to
put
share
this
with
up.
us? Do you have a contraption too, where you got your camera over your shoulder or something?
No.
I've got a light up here. I recently came into money. I won't lie, and I bought myself a new desk and a new light, and so I'm set up. I've got no money left.
You didn't buy yourself an,
That's because Mama wants new shoes.
Yeah, right. There you go.
You didn't buy yourself an assistant, did you?
Oh, you know what? That would be great. I don't know what I'd get them to do. I don't know anyone near my page, so they'll just have to
Oh, okay.
make me coffee.
Oh, okay. So is this the initial part of coloring by, is this called the
Oh,
flatting part?
Yeah.
Okay.
So let me show. This is a
So
2-page
who'd we
spread.
lose?
It's just starting.
My,
did you
my,
lose
Oh,
it?
gotcha.
yeah, I can take it off now. I can move this thing out of my face.
All right. So this is a 2-page spread,
Okay.
splash page, and I'll give you a start. So here we are. These characters are
still in
ones
there?
that I'm just deciding here
Yeah,
on their outfits, and I haven't done the initial decisions yet on coloring, but I want to get everything outlined and everything, together so I can make those decisions
Right.
quickly.
And Alex,
So
this
the
is
plotting process is just outlining all of it and getting it all started.
Right.
and this
separated.
is a page penciled by Pete and
Yes.
inked by Thomas Formonti.
Oh, okay.
So
I didn't do this in a day.
No,
You've given Roland high expectations at a page and a half. a day.
Peter, you have some seriously complicated work here. So
good,
Yeah, I'm
good
toning it
stuff.
down. I am actually toning it down a little bit. There's too many lines and things.
You kind of got to take the Saviuk approach, right? You got to get some good details, and then that panel with very little. But one of the things you're kind of talking about, Alex, I kind of want to ask you some opinion here, and everybody can kind of toss in. So, one of the things that I kind of go back to in comics is, and you kind of mentioned it several times tonight, is that this is a business, and we are trying to, ideally that you're trying to, sell comics and sell lots of copies so that you can make money. At what point in time as an artist do you decide, okay, I'm putting too much time into every page, I need to learn to cut some corners here and there? How do you decide what corners to cut? How do you decide? I mean, so where do you draw the line between I'm going to be an artist and this is the best representation of my work, and this is a business, I need to get these pages done?
I think it's just, I guess for me, it was just sort of like where I was in a particular moment. And for me to explain that, I'd have to say that in looking at I want to say my heroes, my influences, the guys that I really liked, except for Neil Adams, were never really that heavy into detail. I mean, you look at Gil Kane, and yeah, when Gil Kane inked his own work, there was a lot of lines going on in there, which quite honestly, they didn't, in some cases, they didn't all need to be there, depending upon who inked it. Okay, the lines would be there. They might be embellished in a different way. Gil was all about structure. John Romita, his work, as beautiful as it is very simplistic in its presentation. Ross Andrew, another one of my mentors, when I worked on The Flash at DC Comics, Ross was the editor. And so I have to count him as a mentor because he taught me a lot in those 7 months that I worked on The Flash. And even though his work was detailed in the fact that he was a stickler on realism when it came to backgrounds. I mean, I remember he did a story in the Brooklyn Navy Yard that Marv Wolfram had written on a Spider-Man story. And Ross, just like I went down to the Lincoln Tunnel, Ross went down to the Brooklyn Navy Yard with his camera. And he was climbing all over the place. He said, hey, the guys were saying, what are you doing? Well, I'm working on a story on Spider-Man. And of course, you know, even back then, people would go, oh, really? Comic Spider-Man? That's so cool. Go ahead. So he was
I need an
taking
aerial
shots all
shot,
over.
so I'm climbing to the top.
Yeah, I mean, Frank Miller, when he first started drawing Daredevil, he was on, you know, he was living in Hell's Kitchen, and he went up on the rooftops and he was taking pictures of all those cool things that you find on roofs that normally you wouldn't imagine, the shapes on some of these vent things and whatever.
Water towers, Peter. Water towers.
You gotta have water
Right.
towers. Exactly.
He loves water towers.
You've got the water towers. I always try to throw a water tower into, you know, my cityscapes only for the sake of a change of pace. Because after a while you get, even though John Romita told me a long time ago that a building is like a character. Every building, for the most part, especially in a big city, is different. I mean, they might be sort of rectangular in base, but they've got outcroppings. There's design work going on. Nowadays, if you look around at certain buildings, you know, you've got rounded sculpting going on and all kinds of windows and glass sheets and everything. And it's a lot different than, let's say, New York City and some of the, you know, when I first started drawing it. But I was always one to, let's say, I was never like super detailed because I found that, you know, that old adage about less being more. As long as you had the drawing can shine by just having the proper outline on your figure, as opposed to having to throw in all this extemporaneous stuff. And if I get detailed, I usually try to, you know, limit my details to, you know, maybe a little feathering on some musculature. I like to do double lighting. So if you got double lighting, you're automatically going to be prone to detail, depending upon where the light source is and how that thing's bouncing around. Okay, so I would say, and then when I was drawing the Phantom, I mean, the Swedes and the Australian guys, where the Phantom is very highly popular, their god is Cy Barry, who was drawing the Phantom for about 30 or 35 years. And Cy's work, beautifully drawn, but only detailed to the point of necessity. You know, nothing extraneous about Cy Barry's work. So, I mean, the Phantom, you know, the Phantom had broad shoulders and he looked like a freaking powerful guy, but you didn't see the outline of every muscle in his back and the outline in his abs or even on his arms. You knew that the guy was a big guy. He was wearing a goddamn sweatshirt in Africa, for Pete's sakes, okay? And what's his name? Alex Raymond, he did the same thing with Flash Gordon. Flash Gordon just looked like a very athletic, strong, well-built guy, and he didn't have muscles coming through all of his clothing and stuff. So unless you're not wearing a shirt, or if you're wearing, excuse me, spandex, I mean, why do you need to show all those particular muscles? I'm self-taught to a point where I guess just like Alex Ross, my Bible was Andrew Loomis's Figure Drawing for All It's Worth. Okay. And he stresses muscular groups in there without having to go into all the major details of every one of these muscles. And there are some artists that just want to show off their, you know, an anatomical affinity by giving you every little muscle that's popping out here and there, and when it's doing this and when it's doing that, and they're still wearing clothes, for Pete's sakes, you know. And then there's guys
you're preaching to Pete now.
Yeah, I mean, and then you got you know, I mean, clothing has to be on top of on top of the body, and you know, if you have to learn how to draw those folds. I mean, Dick Giordano gave me a lesson a long time ago on folds, and he goes, hey, Just watch how folds go. And to this day, not so much now, but when I used to sit on a train or on a bus or wherever, you just kind of looked, just would try to follow what the folds were doing on somebody's arm. If you got a jacket on. And
So you were the
arms
creeper on the trains, right? Why is that guy staring at me?
Oh, yeah, I know. I got stabbed 14 times. No, I'm only kidding.
It's funny though, because in that same example, I will tell my students that, because they're writing students, but I'm like, look, you got to listen to conversations when you're out and about in your whatever you're doing. Go to a restaurant, you got to listen to the people, sitting in the booth beside you, because you have to understand how people talk. Now, we don't write real dialogue in comics because that would be bad and boring, right? We write entertainment dialogue,
right?
But you still have to understand how it works in real life.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I like reading books by, Richard Patterson, because I find the dialogue to be very convincing. I've read novels by other people where as soon as they come across a certain point where they have to read, they want to now show you how well versed they are in history, and they go for three pages on the historical background of this scene that they're in, and that just bores me to tears. You can tell me about it, give me a paragraph, but don't go whacked out. I like reading dialogue, the interplay between characters.
Right. Yeah.
You read Robert Parker with, Jesse Stone, and it's just bam, bam, bam. And, Jesse was very laconic, but still there was some dialogue there,
Yeah.
Again.
But at the same time, I am very opposed to writers in comics who decide that great storytelling is 3 pages, 9 panels per page of the same faces looking at each other with different dialogue balloons over their heads. And then by let's say the 9-18, by the 27th panel, both guys like all of a sudden turn and maybe face the reader or turn away from the reader and exit the scene. That's not storytelling. I'm sorry. That's baloney. But then again, I'm old school. Okay, so I grew up being taught by Will Eisner at the School of Visual Arts.
Yeah.
And reading those kinds of comics and stuff. I mean, to think that when I was a little kid, a full 25-page story was such a rarity. The first one I ever read was The Death of Superman, 3-chapter, novel. That's what they called it on the cover, because every Batman book, every Superman book would have 3 stories in it, 3 8-page stories, or maybe 2 8s and a 9. And Green Lantern would 9 times out of 10 be two stories, a 12-pager and another 13-pager. And they were all self-contained. Yeah. Once in a blue moon, you get a 3-chapter book that you go, wow, the story is just going on, and it's really cool, But, people nowadays, they just seem to, it's different. Yeah. And I'm not opposed to it, but, the fact is that in the old days, if you missed a comic, oh, well, I missed that comic. Maybe I'll trade with somebody else sometimes if I ever come across it. Now, if you miss an issue or 2, you're lost.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they don't have a really good inside of the front cover, what has gone before paragraph, like right. When you're watching TV. On the last episode of The Watchmen, and they show you the synopsis of what happened, Speaking of what happened before, has anybody seen the new Perry Mason series on HBO yet?
I have not.
No. Is it good?
Oh man, it was really well done. Very well done.
To check it out.
Barb, you were saying?
Oh, I was saying when he was telling how to learn to do the art, keep it simple and doing the folds of cloth. I've had a lot of people come up to me and say, I want to be a comic book artist. How do I go about doing it? And I always tell them the same thing. First of all, you learn to draw from real life.
Right.
Don't learn to draw from comic books. That's the worst.
Yeah, because everybody has an impressionistic way of, let's say, doing their folds.
Right.
Okay. And, you can do folds with straight lines. You could do folds with some feathering to soften things up. But you have to know where those folds originate. Once you get that down, then you're in fairly good shape. So
Yeah, I think
you
there's
know,
too many artists out there who have learned to draw comics by studying comic books,
right.
and that's the wrong way to do it. You need to
Yeah,
reverse
so
that.
when you think about you guys were mentioning earlier Barry Smith. Geez, you remember those early issues of Barry Smith drawing Daredevil and all that stuff where he was mimicking Jack Kirby, and it really wasn't a good mimic either. But he got into comics. Stanley hired him and said, "Hey, you're drawing the Marvel way, kid. This is great." And then Barry ended up saying, "I think I want to learn how to draw," and we all saw the results of that.
Yeah. Pete?
But yeah, so John Buscema, he went to the Art Students League, as did Gene Colan. They all learned how to draw from life. When John Buscema draws,
One of my favorites.
there's some great panels of, let's say, Loki sitting on the throne, and you could just tell that all his weight is in his butt as he's sitting in there slouching, and he's got his arm over here, and his hand is just dangling on the other point of the throne, and his legs are just really loose and relaxed. Hey, same thing. It's like you see somebody drawing somebody in a room, and he's sitting on a couch. Unless that couch is made out of rock, the cushions have to give.
Right.
So if the guy has some certain amount of weight to him, and he sits on that cushion to show that he's got weight and he wants to relax. If I don't have a model, I kind of throw myself into the couch, and I just feel like, okay, let's see, what would I do if I was really tired, and how would I sit in this couch? And you kind of get to feel that way. In years past, many a times I'd put on a jacket and I'd look in the mirror to see what the folds were doing as I lifted my arms up. People draw jackets where they lift their arms up, and the sleeve is still around the wrist. You move your arm up and it's down here, and they forget to do that. I always like to look for stuff like that, because I'm thinking, wow, you're not making sense here, buddy. But
I love it. Thanks.
Pete, you were about to say something?
I was going to say, what's a Perry Mason?
What's a Perry Mason?
I don't know that.
It's a detective series set in the 1930s.
Oh, that does sound quite interesting, in fairness.
Yeah, it's a period piece. Back in the 50s and 60s, Perry Mason was a TV show.
Yeah.
But he was already an attorney. Okay, and he always won the case. Perry Mason never lost. He was always going up against the DA. The DA would lose cases week after week. I'm surprised he still had a job after all the seasons that Perry Mason was on. But this series is basically in the 1930s, and Perry is still a private investigator. And so, he gets kicked around and stuff trying to solve this case, and it's pretty intriguing. The acting is first rate. Story is really good.
It's produced by Robert Downey Jr.
Excuse me?
It's produced by Robert Downey Jr.
Oh.
Oh, yes, I remember.
Of course, Barb would know
Did you see it,
that.
Barbara?
I don't
Barbara,
watch
did
it.
you see it?
No, I don't. I don't get that channel. But
Oh,
I
Netflix.
took. It's on Netflix. I'll have to look it up then.
Oh no, I'm sorry. No. I just when I got my wife an iPhone for her birthday last year in June, they gave us a free year of HBO Max, and
Yes,
so
yeah, HBO.
we got the benefit of seeing all this HBO stuff now, probably until June. But by then, I'll get to see King Kong versus Godzilla.
Yeah.
And a couple of other things that are coming out in March. So that's kind of cool.
I only get to see the stuff on Netflix and Disney Plus because I have my son's password.
Yeah.
Nobody's given me that Disney Plus password yet, although my family members have it. But I figure if they're not going to offer it to me, I'm not going to say, hey, can you give me your password? No. Hey, I'm the uncle here. If you have it, you want to give it to share with your uncle, that's fine. But if not, The hell with you.
Yeah. Fortunately, my son and I have exactly the same taste in movies. So he'll go, Mom, have you seen this? I'm like, no, I don't get Netflix. Oh, well, I'm going to give you my password. I'm like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I
The
remember
same
my
when
daughter gave me,
Mandalorian came along. He
my
said, you got to
daughter
see
gave
this.
me her Netflix password just the same year that Daredevil came out on Netflix. And I remember that Thanksgiving when she gave me the password, and I was able to binge that first season. And boy, I loved it. It was so cool to see that. And boy, I guess just all the other movies that they had there, some of them were top notch.
Yeah.
Hubby and I are watching Hannibal now on Netflix.
Oh,
I
okay.
love that series. That was
That
good.
is really good.
Yeah, we've got the Disney Plus because my daughter is like she has our Netflix, and she was talking about something, and we're like, you have Disney Plus? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, well, aren't you watching our Netflix? And she said yes. And we said, well, we should be watching your Disney Plus then. So that's how we got Disney Plus.
I hear you. Well, that's cool. That works.
Yeah.
Yep. There's another question from Thwip on here, Alex. He says,
Okay.
he said, how did you get the gigs of storyboarding for the films Hoot and Never Back Down? And would you say that your career in comics informed those endeavors?
Yes, yes. Actually, before I did Hoot, Never Back Down, I did my first film storyboarding venture was in the year 2000 at Universal Studios for a movie that never got made. It was called Claus. Okay, it wasn't about Santa Claus. It was about some creature that had claws around Christmas time. And I remember that first meeting where I'm sitting at this table with, executive producers and this guy and that guy and the director. And the director introduces me as a storyboard artist, and everybody kind of gives you a nod. And then, I don't know, we were about an hour into the meeting and it was time to take a break or whatever. And so somebody asked a question and the director says, oh yeah, well, by the way, Alex works on Spider-Man with Stan Lee. And all of a sudden, everybody their eyes popped open. Like, you know Stan Lee? Do you know Todd McFarlane?
Oh, yeah.
Boy.
I said, yeah, I know Todd. Holy mackerel, you got to come over to my cubicle. I got to show you my Spawn figures. And as a matter of fact, let's see. I did this movie called Lonely Hearts, which had John Travolta and James Gandolfini and Salma Hayek in it, and Jared Leto, Laura Dern, Scott Kahn from the guy from Hawaii Five-0.
Yeah.
This was
these characters.
This was an independent film, and John Travolta was still at his peak, 2005, and he was making $15 or $20 million a movie at that time, but he did this movie because he liked the story. And so when you like the story, you can work out a deal, and the deal was, okay, maybe his salary on it was only about maybe $2 million, but then he was going to get a big back end. The movie made squat. So, but that's not, he goes into it saying, hey, look, I'm reducing my salary because I want the big back end. If you don't get the big back end, oh, well, so be it.
Yeah.
But at any rate, I never got to meet those actors because my job got done on a Friday and they were starting to film on Monday. And I lived in Port Orange, Daytona Beach, and the movie was being shot in Jacksonville. And there was a cinematographer there named Peter Levy, who let me know in no short terms that one of his best friends, or his best friend, is a director named Stephen Hopkins, who was responsible for Predator 2 and The Ghost in the Darkness and a few other things here and there that I'm sure some people may have seen. And he's a huge comic book fan. So could I sign off, or could I maybe, so I said, so would you want me to bring in a couple of Spider-Man books and sign him off to Stephen? Oh, he would love that. Okay, so that's Lonely Hearts. And then I guess I got to do Hoot because the director of Lonely Hearts was friends with the director of Hoot and told him about me. And so I got a phone call to do the storyboards on Hoot. And while I was finishing up the storyboards on Hoot, I remember I was in the gym on a treadmill, I had my phone, and all of a sudden I get this call, and somebody says, "Hey, you were recommended for us to call you to do storyboards. Would you be able to get to Baton Rouge, Louisiana by the weekend?" I said, "Who is this and where are you calling from?" I mean, they didn't give me any name. I'm thinking, okay, somebody wants to attack me, kidnap me, do something. I have no idea. But they mentioned this guy, Peter Levy, who was the cinematographer on Lonely Hearts, and he was working on this movie now called The Reaping with Stephen Hopkins, directing The Reaping, and it was going to star Hilary Swank and Idris Elba before he became, you know, Heimdall and Thor and all Luther and all that stuff. And so, you know, I said, "Oh, yeah, okay, great." So I ended up going to Louisiana in 2005. I think I went there July 4th weekend, and I didn't get done until the middle of September. Working on all kinds of special effects scenes and stuff. I mean, every 2 or 3 weeks, they flew me back home for a weekend so I could spend some time with my family. But then I had so let's say I got home Friday night, and then Sunday afternoon, I had to take a flight back to Louisiana to get ready for Monday. And so I did, I worked on the storyboards for that film, which was kind of cool. What was great about that was because Stephen was a big comic book fan. When on the first day that he was coming into the production offices, we were like, everybody was hanging out in the break room. And, you know, so usually there's this sort of like political hierarchy in film where, you know, you can't talk to this guy if you're not on the level of that guy. And it's a bunch of bullcrap. Okay. So at any rate, so there's all these guys that are, you know, they want to meet Stephen Hopkins. And the special effects guy who knew Stephen says, "Oh, Stephen, this is Alex Saviuk, you know, the storyboard artist." And he goes, "Oh, Alex." And he pushes through the crowd and he comes over and shakes my hand and we start chatting. And I'm looking around and I'm seeing all these dirty looks I was getting from, you know, behind Stephen. And I'm going, "Oh, wow, this is great." And the special effects guy who kind of took me under his wing, he's at the time he was in his early 60s, and he had worked on The Abyss with James Cameron. He had done some work on Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, this guy was all over the place. And so he just said, "Hey," he says, "you know, it's just, you know, it's just the way it is. You know, you just kind of have to feel things out, know your place." You know, I remember being invited to this storyboard meeting, and Stephen is over there and he's going, "Now, does anybody have a particular insight as to how we might go about doing this?" And I raised my hand, and this guy, Richard Urasich, the special effects guy, kicks me under the table. And of course, I withdrew my arm right away. And so I looked at him, and he just kind of shook his head no. And I figured, okay, fine. Hey, I'm not saying a word. And then after the meeting was over, I said, "Hey, what was that all about?" He says, "Hey, when the director says, does anybody just means the assistant director, the line producer, this guy, that guy around the circle, that, you know, everybody's sort of idolizing the director. Okay. You can't, you know, I'm just a commoner, storyboard guy in the back. I'm not supposed to raise my hand." And he says, "Did you see the dirty look that the executive producer gave you?" I said, "No, I'm not looking at the executive producer. Stephen asked a question. I raised my hand." He goes, "You'll see him soon enough. Believe me, people are jealous of the fact that he has audiences with you to discuss storyboards." And and to answer Whip's question, because of my storytelling ability in comics and the fact that Stephen was a big comic book guy, there were a couple of instances where on a weekend they said, "Hey, you feel like doing some overtime?" And I said, "Like, what do you mean?" "Well, Stephen wants to meet with you later, and I think he might have a scene or two that he'd like you to storyboard over the weekend, and then you'll go over it on Monday." I said, "Oh, okay." So yeah, I did that over the weekend. I remember this one scene. I think I drew 110 panels over the weekend.
Grief.
But now the panels were sort of like 1.5 by 3, so they were just like quickie. It's like a really cool way of telling a story and yet keeping a cinematic eye about things when you're putting these panels down, because you don't have all the camera, you have camera angles, but you
No.
have to stay within a particular framework because again, every time you make a camera move, it costs money. The 110 panels scene that I had storyboarded, they said, wow, if we do that, it'll add an hour to the movie. So we have to whittle this down to about maybe 30 or 40 frames tops. And they did. And so that worked out. But I can recall when I mentioned money, I can recall doing a scene where at the end of the movie, Hilary Swank with this girl, they're walking through these flames, walking into the flames and then coming out of the flames. And if you do cuts where the flames are the special effects, and if you do cuts behind them, so the side of them in the flames, and then the front view as they're coming out, that becomes 3 shots. Each special effects shot is $50,000. Okay. So they said, what I need to do is need to move the camera, make it 1 shot, move the camera from behind them and rotate the camera with just a rotation move, no cut, and then end up in front of them. And just how you set it up and draw the arrows will let them know, hey, this is 1 shot and it only costs us 50 grand instead of 150 grand. And even though that movie had the biggest budget of any film I ever worked on, of about $65,000, still, I mean, they had to penny pinch when it came to all the special effects that were just adding up like crazy.
Wow.
You know, and when you see that list of credits at the end of every movie that you watch, all those guys are getting paid. Okay. And you know, those, you know, when you've got, when you see producer, executive producer, executive producer, executive producer, assistant editor, assistant executive producer, and then 3 more executive producers, they're all getting paid. Okay. And as soon as they have that title of executive producer, they're making money. Okay. Stan Lee would be an executive producer where they would call him up and say, hey, Stan, here's what we're going to do. What do you think? I think it's great. Okay, great. Bye, Stan. And he'd get paid 150 or 200 grand. He's executive producer, you know? So, but yeah, to answer your question, yeah, my comic book affiliation, you know, doing Spider-Man, working with a director who is a big comic book fan, and there's a lot of directors in Hollywood out there who grew up on comic books now. And if I remember at the time when I was working on The Reaping in 2006, or no, 5 was supposed, and I think it ended up coming out in 2006, because we were in Baton Rouge at the time when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. Okay, so when it was just about ready to kill us, they rented a plane in Baton Rouge, and 200 crew people got on the plane, and we flew to Austin, Texas, and we hung out in an Omni hotel for a week. And then I thought that was the end of the movie because some of the locations that we had visited, and I had done some sketches and whatnot on some of these. For a case in point, there was an old monastery. Oh man, it was so cool looking, just on the water's edge of this river in New Orleans. And there was a scene that was going to be shot there. And after Hurricane Katrina, that thing was completely underwater. So now they had to go find a new location. Okay. And if you saw the movie, you'd see where they ended up. I think they ended up in Mexico or something like that, which again is another expense. But
so that's why we love comics, right? Because we've got an unlimited special effects budget.
That's exactly what Julie Schwartz said to me when I first started working for him. And he says, listen, he says, you have the benefit of being the producer, the director. You don't have to worry about money. You can create whatever environments you want, and it doesn't make a difference because, hey, it's just a comic book and you're getting paid. I mean, I don't know are any of you guys familiar with what Liam Sharp has done with Green Lantern over the last couple of years? I mean, that stuff is insane. The things, the worlds, and whatever that this man has created. And I even wrote to him on social media and said, Liam, you're getting really carried away here. I mean, they can't be paying you enough to do this. And he says, no, they don't, but I love it.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing. You know, you got to love it. John Romita told me ages ago, he goes, hey, listen, you know, if you want to do comics, you have to have it in your blood. You have to be passionate about it because, you know, we don't make a lot of money. We work, ridiculously difficult hours, but you know, we love doing it. It's in our blood.
Yeah.
You know, Will Eisner even said the same thing many, many moons ago.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
but now after doing it for 44 years, and I'm going to be 69 this year, and I've got my bones are aching, and you know, I want to sleep more. I don't know. John Romita told me many, many years ago. I mean, he's 90 now, but probably when he was around my age, he said, you know, Alex, he says, I envy the young kids of today in comics. And I said, why is that, John? I said, you're John Romita. He goes, no, he says, I know, but he says, I envy the fact that they have so much passion. He says that all the years that I've been doing this, I seem to have lost my passion for it. I can still do it, but I'm not as excited about it as I used to be. And I hate to say it, but there are times where I'm at that particular point.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, I mean, I still draw. I haven't drawn a Phantom story in a while, but I'm doing a lot of commissions. I'm working on I'm storyboarding a Bible video project that's, you know, taking place in Orlando. So my comic book stuff has basically come to a halt, although I'm going to be doing an independent story, like maybe an 8 or a 10-page story for a buddy of mine who's starting up a company. And he's already corralled a couple of artists like Alan Weiss and Al Milgrom and a few other people to do artwork for him. And so, I mean, that story should be ready in a little while. And then a buddy of mine in Sweden has become the new editor of the Phantom. So at any point in the next couple of months, I could get an email where they might ask me to do a Phantom story again. And actually, the Phantom is also, as I had mentioned, big in Australia. And I am going to be working on a Phantom story for them too. They're just waiting for some script approval right now from King Features. But I still like drawing the Phantom. But quite honestly, I'm going to be working with a buddy of mine, Jeff Vaughn. And
I know
Jeff.
Yeah.
And we've talked about, you know, doing some creator-owned stuff together for a really long time. I'd like to do, you know, overcoat, hats, mystery type stuff, get away from costume heroes.
Yeah.
And draw lots of folds and clothing and dark alleys
and fire engines.
Yeah.
Yeah. A little noir there. Well, that's
and having the private eye not be, you know, look like John Hamm so he can beat the crap out of everybody. No, he gets himself beat up, you know, just regular people.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I really enjoy about being retired is that I don't have an agenda anymore and I can do my own book at my own speed and I'm enjoying it. You know, I don't have a deadline to meet if I don't want to. I'm the boss.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, it's relaxing. I do it every day. But maybe I've got the grandkids one day or something like that. Like, well, I'm going to babysit today. So yeah, it's nice. I love it. I love being retired. It's given me a whole new enjoyment of comics because now it's just fun. I don't need the money. Thank God.
When people ask me, well, gee, Al, wouldn't you I mean, I'll do a commission, and people, you know, the fans get excited, and they go, oh man, this stuff looks great. It looks better all the time. How come you're not doing a book for Marvel or DC? And the first answer is, well, number one, they're not calling me.
Right.
Number two, unless it's just going to be like an issue or something, or maybe a 3-part miniseries where they tell me I've got like 6 or 8 months to do it. Okay, I don't want to be pressured into work, burning midnight oil or any of that kind of stuff.
Too old for that shit nowadays.
It gets to 11 o'clock, 11:30. If I took a nap earlier in the day, I'm still watching TV. But if I didn't take that nap, I want to go to sleep. You know?
I am too old to be working 12 to 16-hour days, 2 pages a week anymore.
Of course.
I enjoy doing this at my leisure. It's fun. It's fun.
Yeah, I mean,
I put the fun back into it.
I do a couple hours here. My dog is always wanting to go out, so I got to take a break and go out with the dog. You know, We bought a new house back in October. I have a lake in my backyard, and it's really kind of serene to look at. I still stand out there going, really, is this my house? This is crazy. This should be a vacation house, but this is my new house. It's kind of neat. I got a lot of, if you want to use the term, if the term white noise is still acceptable in this modern society, I got I-95 across the other side of the man-made lake. So there's always this whirring and whooshing going about. So it's not like there's dead silence when I step outside. It almost sounds, with the noise of I-95 and the traffic and the water out there, it almost feels like I'm living at the beach. And, the waves are kind of making all this noise, and I got the wind and whatever. It's very relaxing. My wife still works at Publix as a cake decorator. And when she comes home, she just loves sitting we have a screened-in patio right now. She loves sitting out there and just enjoying the weather and reading a book, and then probably taking a nap because she's exhausted.
I know exactly
she's at the point where within the next year or two, she'll probably retire, or at least
I know
want to go
exactly
part-time.
what you're talking about. Now, when we first started, I was so full of passion and fire that, it burns so hot, and you do it for 7 days a week, 12 to 16 hours a day. And after almost 20 years, that passion, that fire has burned you out from the inside out. And you got to take a break for a while. And I found that now that I'm retired from, and I can do it at my leisure, the fun has come back.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. I just did a commission for a guy, long overdue. I don't know if anybody has, follows me on Facebook, but it was a sort of a reimagining of the Amazing Spider-Man 119 cover with Spider-Man versus the Hulk. And, the guy these people that are diehard recreation fans, they want the logo, they want the corner box, they want their Comics Code approved symbol in the top side there, and all the lettering and the logos and the whole 9 yards. And so I make the mistake of saying, yeah, I'll do the recreation. Here's what it'll cost. If you want all the lettering and stuff, it's going to cost you X amount more. But, I should be charging more for that because I hate doing it. I don't like doing the lettering part, although I have this really cool lettering marker with a chiseled top nib that works really nicely. So it's, and it's just cover copy, so it's no big deal. But I got a light box to Spider-Man logo, put it on there.
Yeah.
Done that a couple of times already for some people. And it's not usually that they go, oh, do you do logos and stuff too? No, I offer it to them, and I give them a price, which I find, well, it's probably more than they might want to pay. But if you don't let them know this is what it is, then they're not going to say yes or no. And then they go, oh yeah, that's fine. And you go, damn, I should have asked for more money.
Yeah.
Alex Thwip has another question here. He says, you co-created the character Nightwatch, and he is often compared visually to Todd McFarlane's Spawn. How often do you get questions on Nightwatch, and if he was inspired by Spawn?
Whip, you're the first person that ever asked me a question about Nightwatch looking like Spawn. Actually, when Terry Cavanaugh, who was also my co-creator there with that character, when he gave me the description, it was basically to come up with some sort of a variation of Todd McFarlane's Spawn, because, well, what's more flattering than trying to copy somebody else's success?
Yeah.
Because McFarlane had left Marvel to go create Spawn, and it was making millions of dollars. And so I remember when I did the designs and I first showed it to them, I said, are you sure this isn't going, we're not going to get in trouble with this, because it really looks a lot like Spawn. Oh no, it's perfect. I said, okay, I'm writing that down. Okay, you said it's perfect. But then actually, if Whip recalls, by the time Nightwatch got to his own comic book, they had, toned down the cape and certain aspects. So yeah, you could say the face or whatever, but certain features, they softened up. So it wasn't, I think I followed whatever 25% plagiarism rule, so you couldn't kill me on it. And by the time Nightwatch got his own book, it was more like a 50% plagiarism thing going on, you know? And by the way, I don't know if Whip is aware of it or anybody else is aware of it, but not that it's been optioned out yet, ready, but Spike Lee is very interested in doing a Nightwatch movie.
Wow.
That's
We
cool.
found that out about, I'm going to say 2 years ago at least, if not more. And it's one of those, oh yeah, I like this character Nightwatch, and they kind of leave it on the back burner, and maybe sometime, someday. But in the meantime, you know, Marvel has approached me and said, well, we'd like you to sign this character, this agreement for this, that, and the other thing. I said, I signed a new character agreement already, which is very beneficial to me back in 1992. So I'm not signing anything else at the moment. And even Howard Mackey, my friend, my good friend, who's also best friends with Terry Cavanaugh, said, hey, listen, yeah, Terry said, hey, you know, give him a call someday so he can talk to you about, you know, his, you know, what his attorney has suggested and this, that, and the other thing. Since nothing has come about with it, I haven't bothered to give him that call yet. But if something should come up, yeah, by all means, you know, I'll get in touch and see what happens. Because if it's, you know, if we've created a character and he gets his own feature, then it means, you know, it'll be more money for us and royalties, etc. You know,
participation. Yeah, I didn't
yeah,
realize
it's like
you.
Tombstone. I co-created Tombstone with Jerry Conway, and I remember at one point, I would say before the Spider-Verse movie, animated movie came out, I was at a convention the year before, and somebody came up to me at the table and said, hey, so have you heard that Tombstone's going to be in the next Spider-Man movie? I said, really? You got to be kidding me. I said, that's great. I said, but I already heard that there's going to be, the Michael Keaton's coming back as the Vulture, and they're going to have some other character in there. I said, I hope that they don't really wreck it. And, you know, because if there's too many villains in the pot, it's just a bad story.
Yeah.
You know, we've already seen that. I don't have to even bring that up. But as it turned out, even though I asked Jerry Conway about it, he says, hey, you know, I don't know, you know what we would make as far as money on the movie, but you know, if there's licensing, we'll make a killing on the licensing if they come out with new toys and stuff like that. Yeah. As it turned out, the next Spider-Man movie happened to be Into the Spider-Verse, which it made sense then. Oh yeah, that's where Tombstone is going to show up.
Yeah.
And you know, I remember Marvel getting in touch with me at the end of that particular year when the movie was going to debut, and they wanted to fly me out to California for the opening. And I'm thinking, and it's funny because they offered me money so I could buy my ticket and stuff like that. And in the same breath, they said, well, if you don't want to come to the opening, we'll give you the money anyway. And so I said to my wife, well, why the hell would I spend a plane ticket for LA, get the hotel room, just so I can schmooze with these guys who, you know, might smile at me and say, yeah, Tombstone was great, long live Tombstone. And then they'll never talk to me again after that. Well, what's the point? And then I found that after I declined, I found out that the following week they were doing another opening in New York City. And I said, well, I'm on the East Coast. Why didn't they just offer me New York City? I got friends and family there.
Yeah.
That would have been fun. But no, they just a little bit brainless on how they were planning that whole thing out. So
yeah. They don't often know what the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, do they?
Exactly. Right.
And I saw Tombstone in the a couple years ago in the Spider-Man video game that came out.
Yes, I heard that too.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, he's in there as well. You know, so yeah, it's a great character, one of my favorite villains.
Yeah, cool.
But he got his butt kicked by Aunt May in that cartoon movie, man. So that's not really cool. Aunt May's not supposed to be using baseball bats and hitting people over the head with them, you know. Turning out to be some sort of a agent for the underground CIA or whatever it was.
She's supposed to be hitting them with her purse, isn't she?
Yes, the purse. There you go.
The purse. Yep. Yeah. Well, it's 11 o'clock here, so I guess yes, it is.
Holy Christmas.
See, I told you we have a great time when we just sit down and
well, you know what? I hate to say it, when I hate to say it, once I get started on answering these questions, it's a good thing that you were talking to everybody else first, because I just ramble on and on. I hate to
No,
say it.
that's what we wanted you to do.
Great.
I've talked to you long enough to know. So do you have, Alex, do you have any, are there any conventions, appearances, store signings lined up in the future? I mean, I know we're still,
Well, you
in
know
the middle
what?
of COVID.
Right now, I haven't. The only thing that I've agreed to doing is all the way in November. There's a convention I think I did that show maybe about 3 or 4 years ago in it's either Arkansas or Alabama.
Oh,
And they asked me back, and I said, well, yeah, I think I could do it. And they were so excited. They said, because, oh, we reached out to a dozen people, but nobody's gotten back to us. You're the first one. And I said, well, if I can get the vaccine sometime before, anything goes on, because initially they said, oh, if you got the vaccine, not that you should, not be careful, but it should give you a fair amount of protection. You still got to, wear your masks and social distance just to be on the safe side, because all these new variants that are popping up left and right all the time are making them a little bit wary of, hey, how effective are these vaccines really going to be for all this stuff that's coming out? But it actually follows suit with, just getting a flu shot. I mean, there are so many strains of the flu that are present every year, but we're getting a flu shot to protect us from the one that seems to be prevalent for that particular time period.
yeah.
Doesn't mean that we can't get a flu and after the flu shot, but so far I've had the flu a couple of times, but I've never, been on death's door or anything like that. This COVID thing is just a little bit too scary, because even for some people in my family got hit with it, and even though they came out okay after about a week, unfortunately, from what my brother's in biology and stuff like that, teaches at Daytona State University College. And, from what he's read and researched, the after effects of the scarring that's caused by, especially in the respiratory system with this virus you'll take that with you for the rest of your life. I mean, I saw 3 photographs side by side. One was an x-ray of a clear lung, and it was sort of like almost black because it was a healthy lung. And then if you had a lung of a smoker, then it was half occluded. Okay, with the coronavirus survivor, the whole screen was practically all white. You could almost not even see the outline from the scarring that occurred because of all the of the damage that the virus had done to that individual that survived. So you got to really be careful. But I have not. I mean, I saw that you've got something going. In September, I think, or Daytona Beach.
Yeah, Daytona Beach.
September. I mean, I know that's kind of local. I mean, I'm probably not going to be going on any planes or anything until maybe next year if they've got a better grip on this. But I would say I'd have to wait until maybe after the summer.
See how things
commit
look.
to doing anything. There's I think it's called a Collecticon there's this guy named Greg Bonaire.
Sure, I know him.
You know Greg? Yeah, he's got
Boney?
a one-day show. He's been trying to get me to that show for ages.
Yeah.
And so I know it's a one-day thing, but again, unless it's at a particular level where I will feel safe,
right?
I don't want to commit to anything.
Yeah.
I mean, they had at the Volusia Fairgrounds, they had their January thing, and they from what I understand, that it was packed the entire freaking day.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, I mean, that might be great for business, but the last thing I want to do is be in a hot room with packed individuals,
Well, I was there. It wasn't hot, so it was a good day. But that was one of Tom Ropp's shows.
Yeah.
And everyone had masks on. There was there was hand sanitizer at every vendor's booth, and so Tom even I don't know if he wants me to talk about this, but Tom even kicked a guy out who was unwilling to wear his mask. He came in and then took his mask off, and Tom said, "I got to ask you to leave. You're not gonna wear your mask." And So yeah, so everyone wore their mask, and they're on that. Tom was, for sure on that pretty good. So, yeah,
Yeah, I miss it.
it was packed. There was a lot of people there.
Yeah, well, everybody's missing conventions. You
Mhm.
know,
Yeah.
you get you got an opportunity to get out of your freaking house
Yeah.
to do something that you enjoy doing. I mean, hey, look, I'm a freelance artist like everybody else that we're talking to here, whether they be writers, artists, inkers, pencilers. Okay. Hey, we've quarantined for our entire lives. Okay.
Yeah,
We've been
that's
sitting
right.
in our rooms.
Made
Okay.
for this.
Just, I'm not saying we waited for this, but we always had the choice of, hey, you know what? I'm putting my pencil down and I'm going to go to the store. I'm going to go
Right.
see a movie. I'm going to take the wife out to a restaurant tonight. And now you have to be so cautious that, certain things that you really, really enjoyed doing. I mean, I love watching television in my house. I got a 60-inch TV and I got a pause button if I have to go to the bathroom or if I want to
Yeah.
go in the kitchen and get some coffee. But I still enjoy seeing some things on the giant screen,
Yep.
I mean, King Kong's going to fight Godzilla on my 60-inch television. I'll have to be happy with that.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this show in November, it wouldn't happen to be Comic Conway, would it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I know that. And Howard and I actually, about 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years, no, about 3 years ago now, were there and had a blast at that show. So have you done
I
it
did.
before?
Howard was the one that recommended it to me. And he did it 1 year. And then he was supposed to show up the second year with me there. And then at the last minute, something came up, family, personal wise, whatever, and he couldn't make it. And then I would imagine they might have had him again, maybe like you say, when you were there.
Yeah.
And so I had even mentioned, hey, is Howard going to be there? Anybody from that group? And they, at the time, they just said that, nobody's gotten back to them yet. So we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah.
But I just figured I'll say yes because it's so far down the road.
Right.
Hopefully things will ease up a little bit more and there'll be more precautions or, like I said, I got to get my vaccine.
Yep.
I mean, I've got, besides my age, I've got, too many risk factors being diabetic. I'm not exactly the skinniest guy on the planet.
Right.
Although I'm, losing weight a little bit of here and a little bit there.
good.
I'm still, by November. Is that supposed to be black or are those stitches on the bear's paws there?
They are X's. Looks like stitches.
Stitches, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, stitches.
I didn't want
November's
somebody to be confused, like, oh man, I should have put a black in there. I guess somebody's gonna be annoyed with me.
No, it looks like it could have been that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah, November's still what, eight months away. So hopefully,
Right.
Yeah.
Now, New York Comic Con is in October, and that's like, wow, you go to New York Comic Con, you make a lot of money, you have a great time, but wow, that could be a sardine can. So I don't know if they're going to actually do it.
Yeah. I haven't heard about that one. I know they moved a lot of the spring conventions to the fall. So
I remember MegaCon got moved. Was that supposed to still be this year?
I think MegaCon's been moved to like September, October, or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't remember the exact dates, but I do think that that has been moved to around that same time.
Right.
Thomas Flormonti says, great hearing from you, Alex.
Who said that?
Thomas Flormonti.
Oh, okay. Hi, Tom.
Yeah. So, well, Alex, thanks for hanging out with us. And, of course, we'll be back here next week at 9 p.m. And don't forget our Wednesday Whammers. We'll be here Wednesday at 9 p.m. And until then, remember to make mine
Silverline.
Silverline.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so
Ciao.
much.